Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace. Game number 29, Ultimate Muscle, The Kinnikuman Legacy, The Path of the Superhero. Oh, come on, another fighting game with only one other game in between the last one and this one? I swear, sometimes that wheel has a mind of its own. So yeah, we got another fighting game. Or, okay, I guess this is more wrestling than fighting, but it's still essentially the same idea. You challenge your opponents to a physical scuffle and try to overpower them by knocking them out. It's really that simple. However, this is admittedly a little more than just any ordinary wrestling game. Ultimate Muscle was actually a Japanese manga that would eventually turn into an animated television series as well, and would end up releasing in North America by 4Kids Entertainment, being part of a Sunday morning programming block on Fox called the Fox Box, where it would actually be one of the first 4 shows of this particular block introduced in the fall of 2002. In fact, Ultimate Muscle debuted alongside another TV show that many people may recognize. Let's just say, the star of this show is most certainly a name you should know. Yeah, that's right. It's Fighting Foodons, of course. I mean, how could it be anything else? So yeah, obviously there was going to be a video game adaptation at some point, so here we are on the Game Boy Advance. Ultimate Muscle, The Path of the Superhero, I'm not going to say the other part because it's too long of a title, was released in America on June 3rd, 2003, about half a year after the Japanese version. It was developed by Shunda and published by Bandai. The game itself does follow the animated series pretty well as far as I'm aware, but I don't think it covers everything though. Kind of like Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure, I think it goes through a great deal, but kind of manufactures an endpoint for the game specifically, just because the series wasn't officially over yet at the time, or just had more complicated story beats that would have been harder to justify as the ending, or something to that effect. I honestly don't know 100% because unlike Dragon Ball, which many more of my friends have seen, I think only one of my friends has seen the show in full, and they weren't really even sure if the show was good either. Yes, Mega Freak 400, I'm talking about you. Point is, I was going into this extremely blind and not really knowing what to expect. Although, pretty par for the course for a series where I have to play over 900 games, huh? Now, there are a couple of modes for this game, but I ultimately decided that beating the story mode was going to be the simple completion requirement for this one, since it's structured like a typical fighting game campaign mode, just with cutscenes and dialogue segments in between each match to showcase the story of the main series. And it seemed like the default difficulty of this game was set to easy as well, so I stuck with that. I think higher difficulties, aside from making things harder, just serve to unlock other characters for the other modes though, so nothing that really impacted the ending anyway. But yeah, let's get into it. Or, well, that's kind of what I was hoping for anyway, but, well, the game had some other ideas. Admittedly, I put myself through this, so I only have myself to blame, but I did it with the best intentions in mind. And although it was hell, I don't regret doing it because I would have probably been completely lost otherwise. Anyway, I decided to do the training mode first. Why? Well, I'm already not great at fighting games, but I also remember getting an old N64 wrestling game as a gift one year for Christmas. And I remember hating it because it did a really bad job of explaining the controls and how to perform certain moves. So if there was gonna be a tutorial to help me learn some stuff for this game, in an effort to beat it faster, it was probably not a bad idea to stop in and see what I could learn about this game before I jumped into the deep end with it. This had mixed results. On the one hand, I did learn a good amount about the game, how certain things work, things to look out for, the basic goal of each fight. Basically anything that could help me in the most basic of ways, the game at least got me started with it. On the other hand though, I definitely feel like the tutorials went on for a bit too long. Or, at the very least, the game may have had too many mechanics to begin with, and then tried to teach all of them to me at once, and it just kind of made me frustrated and overwhelmed more than anything. Half of the stuff I learned, I don't feel like I even utilized or needed to utilize in the main game, and even if I were to play more of it beyond just the simple completion goal, I just don't think the tutorial would have been a good resource to use in order to do so. I kid you not, the tutorial was like 20% of my time playing this game, and it was a brutal way to start, just being real with you. You basically get coached on how to do all the general game mechanics and all the different slight variations of moves you can use with each of them. Then the game is like, do a couple of these for a while until I stop you, and then we move on to the next lesson, which I do like the learn by doing approach, but most of this stuff wasn't just one thing at a time either. Like I said, they basically introduce everything about that one aspect and kind of just expect you to completely register it immediately, and then when you start actually practicing and incorporating the moves, it's hard to know or remember if you've done them all, or in some cases, if you're even doing them properly to start with, because your coach doesn't react until you finish the lesson. It really just kind of felt aimless here, and it only served to get me worried about what was gonna arrive in the actual game. So, 40 minutes later, after finally finishing the tutorial, I officially start the story mode. So, a long time ago, this world was under the great protection of a group known as the Muscle League, led by King Muscle himself, and this motley crew managed to keep the world safe from bad guys. However, later on in life, after the League's power had started to dwindle, some of the bad guys had started to reemerge, in particular a group known as the DMP, which the game claims that nobody knows what the letters of this group stand for. Therefore, I will call them the Dumb Moron Posse. See, this is what happens when you don't name your acronyms. I will take advantage of that oversight. Anyway, the dumb morons overpower the Muscle League and start trying to put their plan of taking over the Earth into motion. Now, all the kids of the newer generation are being sent to the Hercules factory to train up to become the new heroes of the Muscle League and save the Earth from certain doom. Now, one of the kids just so happens to be our protagonist, Kid Muscle himself, the progeny of King Muscle, which means surely he must be a hero of great value and importance, right? Well, no, not really. He's actually in last place in the academy right now, and is kind of a lazy good-for-nothing who doesn't really even want to be here or do anything in the first place. Heck, he even forced me to bring out my ass sensor to cover up his rear during these first cutscenes. I guess you could say that we can finally add 1 to the GB Ace ass counter, or the GB ass counter if you must call it that. So yeah, Kid Muscle seems to be a pretty unlikable protagonist here. Probably representing the trope of troubled rapscallion who doesn't really care and eventually becomes a big hero after putting his mind and lots of training into it. So already I wasn't entirely invested, except in just the general interest of getting this game over with. So we apparently have to take on 3 bad guys who are part of this DMP group. The first being a giant cell phone named Diabolic. Great, lovely pun, video game, or rather, manga writers, or translators, or whoever came up with the names for the English localization. So here is generally how this will work in terms of the fighting. You do a lot of grapple deadlocks, which are basically holds where you try to overpower your opponent by stopping the meter in the colored sections that aren't red. However, at the beginning of the match, the meters are almost all red because you and your opponent are at full health and energy, so you need to find a way to weaken your opponents so the meters will be easier to time. And the more you do get the timing right in these deadlocks, the more damage you will do, and the more you will wear down your opponent. Therefore, allowing you to perform even stronger moves, some of which could end the fight immediately if you hit them at just the right time. Honestly, upon reflection, it is kind of a neat system. I just wish the tutorial implemented this stuff better, because I was definitely stumbling around in this match for a while. Thankfully, we are on easy, and this is the first match, so we didn't really have much of a challenge even if I wasn't exactly sure how to wrap my head around this. The future matches will definitely be less forgiving though, even on easy mode. I also noticed that while I was playing, I could see my health just fine at the top of the screen, but the enemy's health was mysteriously absent. Kind of. You can't see exactly how much health they have, but over time, as their health goes down, you will see their pictures icon background change to different colors to symbolize their current health level, with yellow meaning they are about halfway down, while red symbolizes they are reaching the end of their rope, which means they will be more susceptible to lethal blows and special moves. So, by the time Mr. Bollock got into the red health, I kept trying to land in the body slams, the elbow drops, and eventually he was stunned stupid. This was when I decided to use Kid's trademark Muscle Millennium special move, propelling myself off the ring's ropes and slamming myself into my foe, forcing him out of the ring in absolute knockout. Looks like this cell phone is now out of service. We now have to take on Pumpinator, another member of this crew, who happens to be the grandson of a recurring baddie that the old Muscle League had to take care of on a regular basis, who was named Sneagator. And obviously, he wants some sweet, sweet revenge. Also, mentioning this now for all of you manga purists, I'm just going by whatever names the game gives me, because apparently he's called Maxman in the manga, but gets his name from the English adaptation. Look, I'm just playing the games here. I have no plans to do a deep dive of the entire anime or manga series, unless for some reason it does encourage me enough to do so. So yeah, the fight begins, and I pretty much do the same stuff I did before. It was really that simple. And heck, I even technically did better in this fight, as I didn't even get to my yellow health meter here. I'll say now, if it does end up being this easy the whole way through, maybe I can try to look past the painfulness of that tutorial. Maybe. Not really. That was really, really bad. We then get introduced to the third enemy of this group, who happens to be a dude named Kevin Mask. But, wait a minute. Kevin Mask is the son of Robin Mask, and Robin Mask is a superhero. What is Kevin doing on the side of the bad guys? Well, I guess he doesn't like his father too much, he's a bit of a loner, and, well, I guess there's no strict rule that a kid of a superhero has to become a superhero as well. However, Kevin doesn't exactly like the dumb morons either, so I guess he's gonna leave us alone, pretty much taking out that threat for now. We do get attacked by another trio, though, and this one is led by an old supervillain named Sunshine, who has trained some fighters of his own to take us down. So it looks like we're going to try and take this group down instead. First up, we have Tyrannoclaw, who has a dinosaur head and a dinosaur tail for his hands, prompting Kid to make the quip that his butt must be under his armpit or something like that. So yeah, it's time for another fight, and okay, I'll be real with you guys, not much is going to change from this point forward. This game did get pretty formulaic pretty quickly, and I'm honestly not sure what I could say about a lot of these fights that isn't just repeating myself ad nauseum. And given I am playing on the easiest difficulty option, and the harder difficulty may have forced me to use more varied and advanced techniques, but still, that's just not what is happening here for this series, and I hope you guys understand that. But yeah, Dino Boy goes down, and we get prepared for our next matchup, which I hope we're not getting too used to the game of checkers, because now we're playing chess, as our next opponent is Checkmate. Although I think he should have checked himself at the door before he came into this challenge, because he went down just like all the others, and I won once again. Things get a little weird in the plot for this, though, as Sunshine is given the word from DMP headquarters that his supervillain minions must now be destroyed due to their failures. However, Sunshine doesn't agree with this, so he just decides to set off a self-destruct device on the HQ, which means, well, we win? Somehow? I don't know, I feel like this is kind of the disadvantage of putting a game like this in video game form, since they're in such a rush to get back to the gameplay that they kind of just do a bunch of things to get the plot moving, and we're kind of just watching and going, okay then. Not sure if this means that Sunshine is on our side now or not, but hey, it doesn't matter, as Kevin Mask is back again, and now he wants to challenge us. Apparently his father lost to King Muscle back in the day in one of the big Trojan Crown tournaments, and he wants to redeem his family name by surpassing his father and beating the family that soiled his own. Okay, so there was a little more to talk about with this match, as Mr. Mask here did actually give me a little bit of trouble, and in fact, I actually managed to lose this fight. It was very, very close though, as we were both in the red health, and it all came down to whoever got their special move out first. Kevin was reacting quite a bit faster than some of the other fighters I've taken down thus far, and he was able to just barely clinch this one out. And yeah, with a loss, I pretty much just had to try this again. Thankfully, there is no major penalty like needing to do the whole story over again, as you just have to retry the fight you lost, and it seems like there are infinite continues as well, so no need to replay any long stretches of repetitive gameplay either. What did suck about this circumstance, though, is that this wasn't my only loss to Kevin Mask. I lost a second time as well, and heck, even a third time too. I was just having a really hard time reacting to all the grapples that kept happening, as it always felt like I had reacted a frame slower to what the game was asking for. And of course, whenever I didn't manage to win the deadlock, the AI usually capitalized and punished me for it accordingly, which only prompted one giant feeling of feels bad man. You know what they all say though? Third time is the charm? Well, screw that thinking, because it was the fourth time that was the charm today. And honestly, I don't really feel like I did anything different here either. Heck, he even got me to the red meter before I got him there, but I was just a little bit quicker to react to my special attack when he first got into that health range, which thankfully gave me the win without any additional punishment. After the fight, Kid Muscle and Kevin Mask say their goodbyes as this arc finally comes to a close. Whatever happened to Sunshine though, I don't know, but the game plot doesn't really seem to care about that plot point anymore, and as a result, neither do I. At least with all the villains taken care of now, we can get back to relaxing, or so we would think. Even though the villains are gone, the higher-ups really aren't convinced that we have what it takes to be considered superhero recruits, so we get put into a challenge tournament of sorts where we have to fight some of the higher-leveled superheroes of the second class, also known as Generation EX. If we win, we get to continue doing our thing and stay on Earth, but if we lose, we have to go back to the training factory to get stronger. Guess we have to put our muscles where our mouth is. Unfortunately though, our three fellow compadres all went down to the likes of Generation EX, which means it's all up to Kid Muscle to take on an entire group of baddies all by his lonesome. Well, not like he hasn't already done this anyway, I suppose, but still, it does kinda suck for him, I guess. Our first opponent was a collection of street signs and traffic lights named Road Rage, which seemed less like a wrestler and more like something that was formed by having one of those Katamari Damacy things roll down a busy city street. Unfortunately, this dude also gave me a bit of trouble, but thankfully it was only one extra attempt this time instead of 3, so at least that's something I could take solace in. Damn though, this game was getting pretty difficult all things considered, and although I had a decent estimation for how long this game was going to be, at least in comparison to the completion times of the other GBA challengers, it just felt like we hadn't explored much of the story at all, and already this type of game was far from one of my more familiar genres, so I was a bit worried by this admittedly. However, not much I could have done about that, so I just decided to keep pressing onwards. Next, we were up against Hydrazoa, or at least I think his name is Hydrazoa. They didn't actually say it in the dialogue, and that's what the wiki said his English alias was anyway, so Hydrazoa it is. This dude was really weird and had some very interesting attacks that involved his body stretching out and pulsing to a very weird degree. Kind of unsettling when you really think about it. However, this fight didn't take me multiple tries at least, so I was at least happy about that more than anything else. Our next matchup ended up being against Escara, but before we even got a chance to fight, our friend Kevin Mask showed up again to give us some information. Apparently Escara is not actually a superhero, but a supervillain, part of the DMP of course, and his real name just so happens to be Mars. Mars, huh? Where have I seen that name roving around before? Should have been listening, Escara is no superhero. His real name is Mars. Mars, I think you have some explaining to do. All jokes aside, Mars was actually pretty tough. He had me in the yellow meter almost immediately, it felt like, and once again, it seemed like this match was gonna come down to who basically got their special attacks off first. Thankfully, the second half of the fight went a lot better for me than it did Mars, though, and I was able to edge him out at the very end of it all, just as I was probably about a single attack away from getting knocked out myself. Hey, sometimes all you need is just that little bit of wiggle room to break on through. After the fight, Kid Muscle ends up in the hospital after fainting from exhaustion. I mean, he may be a lazy ass who reserves his energy, but he did essentially fight 3 trained fighters in a row with no real rest in between, so I guess I can cut him a little bit of slack there. In his room while resting, we meet a mysterious figure who goes by the name Sergeant Kinnikuman, who just so happens to be Kid's uncle apparently, and he lets us in on a little secret for why we take so much damage and get injured so often. It's because Kid isn't using the full power of his ultimate muscle, the power that runs in the royal muscle family, I guess. And it turns out that if he doesn't incorporate this great power into his fights, at some point he may end up dying. As a result, the sergeant decides to line up some fighting opponents for Kid, hoping that they will help him draw out those powers so he can start using the ultimate muscle properly. However, these opponents aren't just skilled fighters, but also real bad guys who have been locked up in prison, and they've been promised release if they can take Kid Muscle down, so safe to say they're gonna be real driven to take this victory home, that's for sure. And it's not like Kid is gonna have much choice in the matter either, since, yeah, the alternative is losing his life in the process, so yeah, we're kinda damned if you do or damned if you don't here. We also receive a lantern that will apparently show the progress of Kid as he works his way up to utilizing his powers. When all 3 flames of the lantern are lit, we know he has achieved ultimate muscle. A little bit of time has gone by, and it seems like Kid hasn't really put his best foot forward when it comes to his training, so the Sarge's fighting partner named Brocken Jr. comes by to make sure the lad stays on his game, bringing in a fighter named Jaeger for a little grudge match of sorts. Although Jaeger does want to win his bout to gain some clout for his own reputation. And, well, despite how late in the game we were in, I did actually manage to win this one on my first try. Heck, I wasn't even in red health when I finished this either, so hey, maybe Kid is getting stronger after all. That or Jaeger just sucks. Kind of hard to say, really. With this practice out of the way, though, Kid prepares for the challenges ahead as he gets ready to challenge the baddies lined up by Sergeant K, a group that is now being referred to as the No Respect Guild. And our first opponent of this crazy bunch is none other than Forko Lossus, which I guess is an anthropomorphic forklift or something? My god, this universe is so weird. Which, I suppose that's probably supposed to be the appeal of this in the first place. Weird premise, weird characters, weird plot, you name it, and yes, I do believe there is a market for that. But for me personally, I just wasn't really getting into it or having really any kind of investment into what was going on. Anyway, our match with old Forko here was actually a nail-biter. In fact, I honestly felt like I would have lost if they had gotten the next blow against me, but thankfully I had just enough of a window open to knock him out and win the match. Forko Lossus's reception after the fight isn't so great though, as he gets booed and heckled relentlessly by the crowds. Kid actually managed to step in though and defend him, reminding people that nobody is truly born evil and that malicious ways can be the product of just general happenings in life, and instead of making the situation worse for him, actually shows some compassion for his rival and congratulates him on a good fight, and this shows that Forky might actually have some heart in him after all. Well guys, we did it. It took over 2 hours, but we finally accomplished our goal of redeeming a human forklift. Bet that's a space you weren't expecting me to have on my bingo card. This act of compassion, not to mention just general fighting ability, is enough to light the first of 3 candles in the lantern, so I guess that means we got 2 more to go. Next up in the ring, we have the fighter Hanzo, but before we can face off against him, another mysterious fighter known as the Ninja makes his appearance, and he is apparently a student of Hanzo's rival Kakumo, and he wants a shot at taking on Hanzo first. It doesn't go very well though, and he is promptly defeated, making us Hanzo's next target. Wow, way to introduce a character we have no attachment to out of nowhere, and immediately throw him to the side to try and create some extra stakes in the match, I guess? I mean, it probably reads or views better in the manga or anime, and not so much here, but still, really random inclusion here. And honestly, it probably is a shame that this game doesn't really incorporate these stakes or build-ups optimally, because this fight actually took me 5 attempts to get right. This guy was tough. In fact, he's so tough that he even has a scripted dialogue event after you take a certain amount of damage in the fight, which must mean that he's serious business to have that sort of stipulation. He also has perhaps one of my favorite attacks in the entire game. What? Pinwheel. There's just something funny about getting knocked out by a giant pinwheel of doom, I swear. Eventually, though, after a lot of persistence and perseverance, I take him down by knockout, and we can finally move on with this game. But damn, that did take a while, at least 20 minutes in fact. At least this lights the second candle of the Lantern of Might, because if anything was worthy of that accolade, it was certainly this endeavor. So yeah, let's move on to the final member of the No Respect Guild, a creepy-looking fellow named Bone Cold. Bone Cold is apparently the child of another supervillain of the past, Skullduggery, and heck, the Papa himself even shows up to this fight as well. However, he's not here to be a part of Boney's cheer section, at least in terms of his current alignment. Since those supervillainy days, Skullduggery has changed his ways, and even he admits he is responsible for taking a lot of his anger out on his kid as a result of his constant losses, something that he heavily regrets. However, at the end of the day, he realized that evil will eventually crumble, and is actually on our side now and cheering us on as a result. Wow, way to air your family's dirty laundry in public like that, guys. As Kid Muscle says, resolve family problems within the family, okay? Don't save it for the ring. And well, I guess the family presence was a bit of a distraction apparently, because Bone Cold went down pretty easily. That, or his bones just didn't have enough calcium or something, because after the last fight, this was an easy first try for me. Let this be a lesson, kids. Always drink enough milk to make your bones big and strong. Otherwise, you'll turn out like this bona fide Skeletor wannabe. Seriously, his voice did sound like Skeletor for some reason. And with that victory, the third candle in the lantern starts to burn, which means Kid has officially obtained Ultimate Muscle, and his full potential as a result. Which means it's time to meet up with Sergeant K on Muscle Planet. However, of course he is going to need proof of our ability, so he challenges us to one last trial before we can wrap this story up. And well, yeah, you can bet that this fight will be tough. I did actually get decently close on my first attempt though, and although my second attempt was much worse, I did actually get it on my third. All I had to do was just endure the pain, much of which included several attacks that made it look like he was trying to make out with me, which just made it more creepy considering the relation here, and a time where it seriously looked like he brought an actual gun to a wrestling bout. Isn't that supposed to be illegal? But when his health finally got to red, I charged a Muscle Millennium and finally put Uncle K's trials to rest. He congratulated us on truly obtaining Ultimate Muscle and overcoming his test, but warns us that danger will never truly be vanquished and that the fight is truly just beginning. Kid acknowledges this with a joke, but also a newfound confidence, and seems like he will actually take his training seriously from now on. Wow, it looks like he is actually learning something after all. And if that revelation is anything short of shocking, well, guess what? We get the credits as well, which officially ends this story mode. Wow, an interesting place to leave off at, but considering I know nothing about this series or how much further it goes on, I'll take it for what it's worth. Besides, I think my friend Mega even said that this was probably the most ideal place to end the story mode, considering what was on the horizon and just the general time frame from when this game released, so I'll take his word for it. Before I close this game up for good, I did play around with a few of the other game modes. Although I did honestly consider story mode the completion goal at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think there is anything wrong with at least checking out the other game options. It has a survival mode where you can test yourself to see how long you can last in an endless fighting endurance, and a 3 versus 3 mode where, okay, it's not actually a 3-on-3 battle royale at once or anything, more like the team mode in King of Fighters EX, but yeah, you pick one of the different groups of fighters in this game and battle against the other teams. I didn't see these to completion though, as I had already unlocked the credits, but I did want to see what it was available for this at least. And according to GameVex, it's just some additional fighters to play in these modes, so nothing really that substantial. Which, I guess the biggest draw of this mode is just the fact that you can actually play as other characters instead of Kid Muscle, which was kinda cool and perhaps the biggest selling point of these modes, as it was getting a bit tiring using the same character every single time. Not that the characters play much differently anyway, as you're still basically doing the same process just with slightly different moves, but they're all activated in pretty much the same way. Still, just hearing some new voice clips and seeing something new was a little refreshing at least. I actually ended up picking the character named Dick Von Dick because, come on, his name is hilarious. Plus, his special attack is called Antler Fist, which was just a glorious voice delivery in this game. But yeah, after that, I honestly felt like I was done with this game, which can only mean one thing. Game complete. So yeah, that was Ultimate Muscle. It was a game that we played. Yeah, I'll be the first to admit, I wasn't too crazy about this one. It was already going to have a rough road with me just because it was a fighting game to begin with, but even beyond that, I just don't feel like it did enough to get me invested in it, in terms of the story or the gameplay. Its take on the fighting combat was interesting and was honestly something I hadn't really seen before, and I do think it was creative and unique for what it was, but it just became way too dependent on having very strong reaction times and being incredibly punishing if you didn't. So much of the game was dealing with these timing meters and knowing not only when they would appear, but also the best way to secure a hit when they did, and for me, it usually takes a couple of seconds to get into the zone to focus, so the luxury of time wasn't really in my favor, especially when I got to some of the game's more difficult opponents. And it got to a point where I was literally just doing the same thing every single match as well, which just got kind of boring. The game did try to offer a multitude of other fighting options in the tutorial mode, but I don't think I need to go over again why that's not really a point in the game's favor. And if anything, all it did was just get me to settle with only the few things that did stick with me. I think if this game was a little less focused on timing and reaction-based gameplay, I probably would have enjoyed this a bit more, as what they have here did seem kind of more fleshed out than what I expected it to be, although it was still lacking in quite a few areas. I also think the story mode itself was a little underwhelming, considering you can only use one character to begin with. And like, I get it, it's the story of Ultimate Muscle, in which the main character is Kid Muscle. It's his story and he should probably be the main focus, but if the gameplay itself is just going to be the same process over and over again, it's just going to get overly repetitive by the end of it. And I think having other characters selectable in certain parts would have maybe added a little more variety and charm, or at least a little bit anyway. I also feel like they just kind of rushed through a lot of different plot points very quickly, too quickly even. And I get they are just supposed to add more context to the fights and why they are important, but I don't know. Introducing a character just to kill him off 10 seconds later, at least in terms of their in-game appearance, just made the happening seem more unnecessary than anything. Heck, even Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure had to simplify a lot of its story events, but they at least did it in a cohesive way, and in one that got me more invested in wanting to check out the source material. Honestly, I can't say the same for Ultimate Muscle, so yeah, it's probably going to be another IP that I'm ultimately going to skip out on, just being honest. Not that I had much of an interest to begin with, mind you, but the game certainly didn't do it any favors. I guess since we're already critiquing, I should probably go ahead and move on to the scoring. For overall quality, I initially gave this a 3 out of 5, but I think I'm going to lower it to a 2.5 out of 5. There's definitely potential here, and I do think the game does a pretty decent job with its presentation. The music didn't stick with me that much, but the game itself looks nice, and the animation itself did seem pretty solid and fluid as well. I really enjoyed the sound effects and sound design though. The voice lines were probably one of my favorite parts of this game, and it did add a bit of charm to some of the fights despite the monotony. Although that's probably more credit to the actual manga writers and localizers. Still though, I guess it's faithful to the source material, I suppose. Aside from that though, like I said, the game does lack a bit in numerous areas, and I think it could have been done with more general polish. A better tutorial mode would have also been heavily advised, and the story mode itself could have just been more interesting and engaging. For personal enjoyment, I took this one a step lower and gave it a 2 out of 5. I didn't hate playing this, but I wouldn't say I enjoyed playing this either. Just a case where I recognized the potential, but that's really about it. And for difficulty, I landed on a 2.5 out of 5. Some of the fights can get really difficult, even on easy mode for crying out loud, but Infinite Continues at least made it beatable. And this is already not my genre to begin with, so people more adept at it will probably have an easier time with it than I did, especially since it's very formulaic in the first place. And yeah, good luck with that tutorial though, seriously, it was that brutal. So yeah, that was my adventure of Ultimate Muscle, Pathway to the Superhero. Thankfully, this is the only Ultimate Muscle game we'll be playing on this system, so we are done with this franchise. However, there are still plenty of other wrestling games we'll have to get through, so we'll see how they stack up compared to this game when we get to them. For now, though, let's take a look at the next game we'll be playing for this series. Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.